Well, this is what you call outflanking the platform. So if I just may, my name is Kevin McCurry and I'm the director of the Grade School, and if I may have an opportunity to introduce you and this session.
Go ahead, Evan. I know you since Adam was a boy.
We're very privileged actually in our chair today. We're obviously, needless to say, we're privileged in the speakers, but the chair is an exceptional catch for a session like this, where there is hopefully going to be lively discussion and debate, disagreement and all the rest of it from the various people on the platform. And no better man than Declan too, as Ray said last night, to act like a good umpire to ensure that the proceedings were productive and stimulating. I don't know whether I need to go through all this stuff. He's an eminent journalist, one of the foremost journalists in the country. He was involved with the Irish Times. He was involved in various other publications and currently is a columnist with the Irish News. And we appreciate the fact that he used his position as a columnist to publicise this conference this weekend, for which we are very, very grateful. So without any further ado, I hand you over to our eminent chair.
Albert, Kevin, I certainly put you on the short list for my PR representative. Yes, I did mention it. Actually, my last column, final column at the Irish News appeared last Wednesday, and at the end of it I got in a plug for this event, and Tony actually sent me a note to say, you know, I only have 50 seats. So I'm glad, well, I see we do have still a few seats left anyway, you know. So anyway, it's a great privilege to be asked to do this, and a very distinguished panel, and probably they don't need much of an introduction really. Most of you would know them well. Micheál McDonagh, former Dublin Lord Mayor and currently City Councillor, man who reviewed my book on Sinn Fein with the very balanced headline of Parson's Egg, good in parts. And Eamon O'Keefe, whom I've known for even longer than I've known Micheál. And I was just looking up an article I wrote appeared in March of 1996 in the Irish Times. It was a report of a trip I made with Eamon to prisons in England. And not every day that Irishmen go voluntarily to English prisons, but Eamon's job was to go in and talk to IRA prisoners about the peace process and its benefits. And we had a very interesting tour of England, and finished up at Belmarsh in London, which was the first time we'd seen any security in our direction. They had submachine guns pointed at us, which was kind of alarming and flattering at the same time. So I got to know Eamon quite well in that trip, and we've been friends ever since. And then Mick O'Reilly, who's a trade unionist of distinction and author of a very interesting autobiography called From Lucifer to Lazarus, A Life on the Left. Sort of rather devilish title, but anyway. It's great to see Mick here as well. And so I thought I would take Micheál first, then Eamon, and then Mick, and then ask for questions from the floor. I might even chip in a few thoughts of my own, you never know, overcome my natural shyness.
Kan weakest le school Desmond Greaves as an curriculum there live on shop. Tá mix meaning per more and through and per me least mold and piece of shot and way and our nyarty the shot a grade on coherence and order. It's a merit a so thanks to the Greaves School for the invitation to speak, and it's a privilege to be on such a distinguished platform. I'm still a bit dizzy from the eminent heights that Deglan brought us. There's eminence in Deglan. But
Cardinal error.
well, there you go. but in fairness, as Deglan reminded us, the chair and the other two speakers have played a significant role in their own right at various stages of the developing peace process over the years. Eamon outstandingly in Fianna Fáil, Michael in the trade union movement, and Deglan as a journalist. So the team were given, and by the way, I was asked to speak for about 20 minutes. Now this isn't 20 minutes, but it might be a bit more than 10. So I'm only following orders. Right. So the theme we were given was Fianna Fáil, Sinn Fein, and contemporary republicanism, and that could be approached in a number of ways. And initially, I was tempted to spend much of my time measuring contemporary Fianna Fáil against the standards of Irish republicanism. However, Eamon may or may not be relieved to hear that I'm not going to take that approach, at least not in the main points I want to make. Instead, I'll attempt to set out where I see modern Irish republicanism is today, the place of my party, Sinn Fein, in that, and the part I believe we all need to play in to bring about political, social and economic progress in Ireland. At its most basic and fundamental, Irish republicanism is the pursuit of the end of partition, the united Ireland, and the establishment of a sovereign, independent Irish republic, embracing the whole island and all of our people. There have been, of course, endless arguments and debates, and these will no doubt continue, about the social and economic content of Irish republicanism. There have also been debates about how the struggle for the republic was conducted and how it might be, how it ought to be conducted. And at a previous summer school, 2014, I think, I took part in a panel which looked at the legacy of armed struggle. But as we are asked today to look at contemporary republicanism, we have to say without doubt, without question, mainstream Irish republicanism has for the past 25 years and more pursued constitutional and political change by peaceful means. And this has been the era of the Good Friday Agreement and the other related agreements, and we marked the 25th anniversary of the agreement earlier this year. As a result of 2.5 decades of struggle in the era of the peace process and the peace agreements, and as a result also of the struggle which preceded that in the previous 2 decades of conflict, I believe that today we are nearer than at any time in the past century to the end of partition and to Irish unity. I will immediately qualify that by saying that there is nothing inevitable about this, that this outcome will require much further work and struggle, but I firmly believe that the potential is there for ending partition and building a new united Ireland in the years that immediately lie ahead of us. So I think this is a time of huge opportunity to transform the constitutional, political, social and economic life of this island. It is an opportunity in particular for those of us who strive for progressive change and equality, for the just and equal distribution of wealth, for what the proclamation called the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland, in fact for Connolly's reconquest of Ireland by the Irish people. The whole basis for partition and the sectarian six-county state established 100 years ago has gone. The monolith of unionist power, based on a sectarian headcount in the maximum geographical space to make a statelet viable, and fully guaranteed by the British state, is no more. That is shown in successive election results over the past decade, none more so than in the past 16 months. The current political impasse in the North is not so much a result of the DUP's attitude to the outworking of Brexit as to their profound political dislocation by the result of the Assembly elections of the 5th of May 2022. Confirmation that Sinn Fein was the largest party elected to the Assembly, and that under the Good Friday Agreement Michelle O'Neill is mandated to take up the position of First Minister, came as a seismic shock to the DUP and to many in wider political unionism. The actual electoral outcome may not have been a surprise, but the full realisation that they must choose to serve with the Sinn Féin First Minister, a Republican woman from County Tyrone, or precipitated collapse of the Assembly and a very uncertain future, has destabilised unionism as never before, perhaps. A further cause of destabilisation for unionism is, of course, the latest chapter in the long saga of their love-hate, on-off, dysfunctional and exploitative relationship with the British government, and in particular with the Tory party. Boris Johnson famously stated that only over his dead body will there be a border in the Irish Sea. Well, as we know, Johnson is politically dead, and there is now what unionists regard as a border in the Irish Sea. Having believed the worthless guarantees of successive British Prime Ministers, the unionists now find themselves back in the position of Edward Carson, when 100 years ago or so he lamented what a fool he was to be a puppet in the Tory party's power games. Brexit exposed the contradictions of partition and of the British government's denial of the right of the people of Ireland to national self-determination. In the Brexit referendum, a majority of voters in the 6 counties voted to remain in the EU. Yet the North was dragged out of the EU with the danger of a deepened partition and a hardened border, punishing Ireland for the sake of the English political project, which was Brexit. It was only a major cross-party and international political mobilisation by the Irish people, which won allies in the EU and the US and further afield, that prevented such a disastrous outcome, and Sinn Féin was central to that effort. The question of the British-imposed border in Ireland became crucial in the Brexit negotiations. It resulted in a hugely important EU commitment that in the event of a successful referendum on Irish unity, the 6 counties will re-enter the EU seamlessly and without the requirement of a further referendum or re-entry negotiations. It is for the Irish people as a whole to determine their relationship with Britain, with the EU and with the rest of the world. That is the essence of national sovereignty and self-determination, the core value of Irish republicanism. Partition denies that, and of course Brexit compounds the problem. And yes, the EU itself limits the exercise of sovereignty, which is why Sinn Féin has for a very long time had a policy of full but critical engagement with the EU. But the EU, we must recognise, is clearly where the vast majority of the Irish people want to be. And it is for the Irish people alone, not English Brexiteers, not deluded allies or former allies of the Tories like the DUP, or anyone else, to decide what our relationship with the EU will be. A key argument against the type of hard Brexit favoured by the DUP and the loony right of the Tory party was and is, of course, the Good Friday Agreement. A hardened border, a reinforced partition, would have run totally contrary to the Good Friday Agreement. And thankfully that option was well and truly defeated. And what has emerged, in fact, far from the Tory and DUP delusions, is the exact opposite. The border has been weakened, partition is crumbling. The debate on the constitutional future of the people of Ireland is very much alive and growing across this island. The context for that is the provision in the Good Friday Agreement for an Irish unity referendum. And the key job of Irish republicanism on the constitutional question now is to increase the pressure on the British government to implement that part of the Good Friday Agreement. It must prepare for the Irish Unity referendum. There is an even greater obligation on the Irish government to do so. For years, we in Sinn Féin, with others, have been saying that debate, dialogue, as well as detailed planning and practical preparation for the Unity referendum need to be commenced by the Irish government. Successive governments have failed to do this. They have refused to even publicly contemplate the idea of an Irish Unity referendum. And none has been more reluctant to play their part in that than the current Fianna Fáil leader, Micheál Martin. The least that should be done by the Irish government is the immediate establishment of a citizens' assembly on Irish unity. It would help to structure and formalise the public debate, to engage citizens and focus national attention. It could address the key questions of governance in a united Ireland, how the transition would work, the key changes that would need to be made, the type of constitution that would be adopted, how new All-Ireland public services could enhance the lives of all citizens. Is that you telling me that I have 5 minutes left?
Go ahead.
I thought I heard a tapping, I wasn't sure.
No, I haven't done a tap in your life.
Okay, right. What the governments are neglecting to do, the citizens themselves have already commenced. The Ireland's Future organisation has brought together many thousands of people in meetings, large and small, online and in person, to discuss the potential for a new united Ireland. It involves many people from a unionist background, reflecting the increasing diversity of opinion in a community that was once represented as a monolith, but now more and more is open to new ideas and possibilities. And that is a great sign, I believe, of hope and progress, and it deserves to be welcomed by all progressive political opinion. On a smaller scale, Sinn Féin has been holding people's assemblies around the country, with more planned in the months ahead. Most recently, we had such events for women in Belfast and for youth in Dublin. Trade unionists are also active for Irish unity, and a network is building within the trade union movement, making important links and planning ahead. So this, in my view, is a time of great opportunity for progressive politics in Ireland. The unionist monolith and state is essentially gone. A unity referendum is in prospect. The total political domination of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael is over, and more people are looking to Sinn Féin and others on the left to bring about real change. Sinn Féin is now the largest party on this island, having secured the highest vote in the last general election in this state, and having become the largest party in both the Assembly and in local government in the 6 counties. There is the real possibility to elect an Irish Republican government in this state at the next election, a government led by Sinn Féin, a government without either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael for the first time in 100 years. Such a government would put in place the radical programme needed to overturn the housing crisis, to rebuild the health services, to tackle social and economic inequality and build up the standard of living and quality of life of our citizens. Such a government would push forward to the unity referendum. It would take an independent and progressive stand in international affairs and strengthen our position of positive neutrality. That is the opportunity for contemporary republicanism, and it is not an exclusively Sinn Féin opportunity. It is a path forward for progressive politics in this country. Seize the opportunity, all the possibilities should be explored, help to shape the future. That should be our message, and that's the challenge for all of us. One thing is certain, Irish republicanism, which they tried to exterminate 100 years ago, is now stronger than ever, I believe, and is poised to make further progress. Last Sunday in Cork City, I was with thousands of Irish Republicans gathered to remember the hunger strikers from 1917 to 1981, and with the same commitment and the same aim, the building of a new united Ireland, a republic of equals worthy of the name.
Contribution, particularly the last bit about the political future here, and I think we'll bring Eamon onto the stage now.
Agus an nervle duna ceap bishop ar fihanóman to bhí
Oh, well, all right, now.
Mar a hála le caiicis fi mé ar sire cha a cuiidh ama a réiteach go nócaid seo.
Níl chun bach a chur ar éon bhád a chlan
Má tá go dul le son. Bhilm buchta gach leis an scoil seo, as ó cuiine thuirtam lácht an seo neo. Ar nó ag starí coilú in ag ceartain é Desmond, agus gníomhí ceart chuma. Bhilm rá mar éis mé go cuarma leis méad a bhí le rág Mícheál Mac Donacha agus tuime in súl le néisteach le Mick O'Reilly freisin. I'd like to thank the organisers for the invitation to say a few words here today. I've known Anthony Coughlin back to 1972 when we were both on the same side in a campaign that was organised in that year. I come to that again. I think it's fair to say that many groups claim that they are the true Republicans in the tradition of Tone, Emmett and the Fenians and the leaders of 1916. I think that's really a debate that I leave to the academics. However, I think it is important, or what is important are the beliefs and the aspirations a person or a party has in the context of today's world, and why they believe those beliefs are the ones that best serve Ireland and its role in the 21st century. I believe I'm a contemporary Republican, but if others want to think otherwise, that of course is their prerogative. Now to me, if I was to talk on all of the ideas, and I had an even longer version of this and I had to cut it, it would take more than 20 minutes, it would probably take more than an hour to try outline even the outline of the ideas that I think are encompassed in being an Irish Republican. The idea of the people of the nation being sovereign is absolutely key. Peace, independence, the unity of this island, language, culture, the identity of the people, wealth creation, fair distribution of wealth, for the well-being of the people, inclusivity, community, spatial policy, dealing with climate change, and the protection of our natural environment. Now, I'm not going to go into all of those here, but I think it is important to state that republicanism is not a narrow belief, but one that encompasses all of human life. I think one of the key traditions of Irish republicanism has been the idea of Ireland's role in the world as being one of peacemaker. Too many of these values are under threat in the new Ireland, with democracy itself being quietly overrun on all sides. And I think this is a debate that we need to have within Fianna Fáil. Because it seems to me, even within Fianna Fáil, there are several different value systems in conflict. And it is time we had an honest debate about these. There are some who would move away from the traditional values above into a different space, dominated by unelected experts and elites at home and abroad, and who describe, when it suits them, following the will of the people as being populist. Of course, one of the significant changes of direction in Fianna Fáil's history was not noticed by the vast bulk of the membership of Fianna Fáil at the time, and that was the decision back in 2009 by the then Foreign Affairs Minister Micheál Martin to leave the group we were attached to in the European Parliament and to join the ALDE party, not only as a group in the European Party, but as a pan-European party. So at present we're in the ALDE party, but we're actually part of the Renew group in the European Parliament. As many of you may remember, Brian Crowley was deeply concerned about this in 2009. And in 2014, when he couldn't stay with the group he was in, he actually left Fianna Fáil at European level. and it historically left us with literally no MEP. Our history within the EU up to then had been different. When we joined the EU, if any of you remember back, we were part of the Golos Group, which firmly believed in an EU of nation states cooperating together. The ALDE Party, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats of Europe, describes itself on its website as the party for liberal and democratic values and promotes European integration. Another subtle difference has occurred is many of our senior politicians are actually involved in it as a party. One of them is a co-president, and the other is the treasurer of the party. And we very much are part of Fianna Fein, very much sees itself as being part of the ALDE family and as sharing its value system, as opposed to being a uniquely Irish party whose values and idea spring totally from its membership. So now you've got two conflicting systems. Values that come from a pan-European party and values that come from the membership. Of course, the question is, what is a liberal? I hear all sorts of debates nowadays by left and right. I'm totally confused. Liberal and conservative. And I have to say, I often find it hard to pigeonhole myself. But I think the big hallmark of the ALDE Liberal Party is it's a classical Liberal Party, Liberal Democrats, Liberal Party. It's an integrationist party and believes towards moving towards a full EU political federal identity with all the trappings of state, including a common defence. For us in Fianna Fáil, the question that we must answer internally is whether we will follow the voice of the grassroots members of the party, or whether we are more and more being directed subtly towards conformity with the ALDE's direction and common beliefs. I believe this debate will come to the fore in the coming years. I hate to admit it, and I don't feel that I have been in politics that long, but on the 16th of August I was 34 years a member of the Oireachtas. And one of the subtle changes over the years has been a dramatic decline in this decision-making ability of the government and the Oireachtas over our affairs. Nationally, there's been a large diminution in the power of elected politicians to influence public opinion or make policy proposals, because we always seem to be the last in the chain when a policy change is coming about. You set up all sorts of expert groups and whatever, and they set the agenda. And then we get in a very difficult situation to either go against that head on or accept the policy as determined by others. We're farming out everything to commissions, citizens' assemblies and independent groups. Many decision-making powers formerly exercised by the Oireachtas and the government are now devolved to a web of agencies and external bodies. While some of this might be justified and it's not a black and white situation, the scale at which it has happened is quite staggering. Two other manifestations of this disdain for democracy are the impatience in certain circles in this society with the notion that the only people who can change our constitution are the people themselves. Another problem that I find, and we see it now with this new debate, there's too many TDs. Doesn't matter how many bodies it's set up, but there's always too many TDs. The reality is that I can tell you as a TD, compared to the workload we have to do, the committees, the number of committees in Leinster House, the intensity of work, the amount of paperwork, and everybody who deals with bureaucracy sees this every day. The reality is the Oireachtas is totally under-resourced. And many of us spend our time running from committee to committee and trying to be in two places at one time, as well as being in the chamber. And physically finding it impossible to do what you'd like to do. Another interesting fact is the power of the powerful elites around Dublin, groups of senior public servants, retired public service, business people, academics, national media and experts, who mix around together and have a disproportionate influence on national decision making and policy. Interestingly, my experience as an ex-minister was that the ministers were generally not part of that elite group, particularly if they served rural constituencies, because they weren't in Dublin a fair bit of the time, at least half the time. And the only exception to that was if you were part of the Golden Circle before you got in, you remained in the club. Even the ability of ministers to appoint members to state bodies. Now you might say it was abused, it might have been. But let's look at what is actually happening on the ground at the moment. And remember, state bodies are there to implement government policy. That's the theory of it. So they're meant to be there to implement the policy laid down by the departments of the government. Now the new system, of course, creates a new elite, a new in-group, because you now have to apply to the public appointment service. I've been doing a little bit of research on this, and there's a lot more I'm going to do and I'd like to do. But what you find is those who are used to the public appointment service, ex-senior civil servants, etc., 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 know how to put in the CVs that match the requirements. In many cases, they probably know people who know the people who are doing the interviews, etc., are doing the assessments, but they know the mind. And all of us who fill up forms always say it's a huge advantage to know how the decision maker is thinking. I one time put down a whole series of questions as to what part of the island did members of state boards come from. And disproportionately to its population, they came from Dublin. What I couldn't find out, but what I suspect is that if I could drill further into that, but they wouldn't give me the information, I'd find that the vast majority of those Dublin members live between the Liffey and Bray. And that's calling it, as I see it, as it is. I have to also say I'd be very concerned about the lack of democratic accountability in the EU structures. The Commission, which is an appointed body, has the sole power of initiating policy. Ireland at the moment has 13 members, I think we're going to 14, out of 705. Now, two subtle changes. Some of you might remember back Lisbon and Nice and those referenda. Two things that were hugely emphasised at the time was the idea of subsidiarity, that Europe would always work on the basis of subsidiarity. And I checked on the website as to what subsidiarity means in their definition, and it said that decision-making powers are retained by member states if the intervention of the European Union is not necessary, and that the EU should take action collectively only when member states' power is insufficient. I don't know if half of you realise, because it's impossible to realise, just how many regulations are coming all the time, down to minor detail. And the other one was the principle of proportionality, which states that the content and form of union action shall not exceed what is necessary to achieve the objectives of the treaties. Again, ask yourself, do you believe that that has been applied today? I'd just like to say a few words about unity and independence. I think it's fair to say that unity was always available to Ireland. We could have stayed in the United Kingdom, and they'd have never partitioned the island. But what we wanted, both unity and independence. And that has been the key of the demand by the Irish people. I've had a lot of experience in the North. I got involved initially in 1989. And it's a long story and a long journey in which I got to know a lot of the prisoners that were Republican prisoners that were in prison. And I'm still at that work. north and south, Portlaoise, Magabry, High Bank and so on. But I also got to know people in the Unionist Party, and particularly I have some very good friends in the DUP. Because that's where the future Ireland has to be. I had, during my time as Minister, responsibility for 3 North-South bodies. The Ulster Scots body, the Irish Language body and Waterways Ireland. I believe in a new peaceful Ireland where the remaining powers of Westminster in this island are transferred to the people who live in it. Now I have a flexible view as to how we might exercise that power. Because within that we can decide to have subsidiary parliaments or subsidiary assemblies. I think actually when you sit down to work out the logistics of this, it's somewhere in that direction you have to work. But replacing the Westminster cap over the whole thing, you replace it with an All-Ireland cap. And over time, if you want to do it, rationalise the speed limits north and south to do all the practical things that are different between north and south. But there's no need to do those day one. The big important thing is we have to accommodate all shades of political opinion. Now the one thing that there's no question about, as soon as it's clear from, we say, elections in the north, opinion polls and so on, that there's a majority in favour of Westminster disengagement in Ireland, because that's the key point. Then the Secretary of State is politically obliged to hold that referendum. There is no choice in the Good Friday Agreement from a political sense. And remember, you can sometimes do things legally that are not politically possible. So there might be weasel words legally. I do not believe it's politically sustainable, where it's clear that the majority is shifted. The obligation is politically there, and I do not believe any politician can stand against that. Now my big worry about this is, what assurances in word and deed can we give to unionists, including hardline unionists, to prove that they will be treated fairly in the new state which will come about either as a federal state or a unitary state? I have been of the view for a long time, and I did a lot of work behind the scenes on this, that we handled Brexit terribly in this country. The first mistake made was we wouldn't accept the UK decision, and the UK is the member state, that they wanted to leave. And we were complicit with the EU and tried to get that overturned. My view was their referendum, their system, their decision. Accept it and get on with it, and reduce the damage it would do within this island, which was a key concern, I think, of all of ours. Now, it was clear from the beginning there was a problem in relation to Northern Ireland. Two communities, one looking south towards the EU, the other looking in different directions, and we must move away from +1 majoritarianism in how we deal with this issue. It was clear to me, and in discussions I had, it was clear to some hardline unionists, that the idea of a hard border on the border within the island of Ireland was a total impossibility. I'm not saying every Tory politician, but the people who live on this island, you'd be surprised what their view was. And on the other hand, we showed no empathy. But the difficulty for a hardline unionist being faced with a border in the Irish Sea. And I believe from the beginning, and I talked to many people about this, that we had to find a third way out of our dilemma, an Irish solution to an Irish problem, which is actually where we wound up, but in my view trod on the toes of the unions, which is a fairly benign border arrangement across the Irish Sea, much more benign than would exist if there wasn't this dilemma, and obviously no border within the island of Ireland. in my view, what we should have done as a people, and to hell with all the EU rules or whatever, we should have talked to all of our northern colleagues. We should have come at a common understanding and kept negotiating with them until we reached the point that we knew what we wanted as an island, which is obviously no border within the island, but also the least border between Northern Ireland and Britain from a tariff point of view and goods and things moving. We should have then got the British government on board because they are the sovereign power in the north, whether we like it or not. That was agreed in the Good Friday Agreement. And my belief is that the people of these two islands should have gone to the European and said, we need an absolutely bespoke, unique solution that fits the mess that Irish history is. Now what we managed to do was create 1690. Now I don't know if any of you are into the poetry of Raftery, the Fille. There's a great poem he wrote, Shanachas Nishkeher, where the Bush tells them the whole history of Ireland. And he's taken it, when it comes to the Williamite Wars, as fascinating. Kogandari Honikin Yershin. Seamus Achaka, he didn't blame William. Seamus Achaka Malach Deir. Rinishin the Gael Gaul, the Gaul Gael, Maracura Ornagus. So he saw it for what it was, the fight of the two kings was basically a European dispute that we managed to get caught up right in the middle of it. My view is we have a lot of fences to build and we better start building them fast. I keep going. There's a phrase in the Proclamation of 1916 that I think is hugely important. It's very clever, very far-seeing, and it says, the Republic declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts. And I think it's fair to say, particularly in more recent times, that the prosperity, if you measure it by GNI star and GDP and GMP, is fairly good. And we're counted in international measures as one of the richest countries in the world. But I think it's fair to say we're not doing so well on the happiness index. And our young adults who've worked hard, studied hard, or the people who've had no chances in life, find it impossible to get a house that they can call permanent home, whether it is a local authority house that they have a permanent tenancy on, or a house they get to buy. When we were a lot poorer, that was taken as a given. There are lots of other indices, particularly in relation to younger people, where we're failing. We have a huge corporatization by monolith, large corporations of many services, property and businesses. Somebody sent me a tweet during the week with a manifesto for Fianna Fáil for 1948. There was some interesting stuff in it. Won't go into it all. But the question was asked, were Fianna Fáil in favour of private ownership? Ownership of private property? And the answer they gave was that they were in favour of it, as long as it was as diffuse an ownership as possible. In other words, it was the idea of the many owning a little, rather than the recent tendency, whether it's in housing or anything else, for the few owning a lot. I still personally strongly adhere to this. Just like to say a word about climate and natural world. We must do something about this issue. But we always seem to be coming down on the little person. We get more concerned about somebody having one turf fire than we do about the fact that out there in the RDC we still have only one wind farm after 30 years of the first wind farm being built, which would eliminate all the turf fires in Ireland if you had a state-owned plentiful supply of God-given energy from the seas around our shore. So my frustration with our climate policy is that we write, we bring in laws, but we're not acting. Similarly, it's interesting to look at public transport that we seem to talk about every day. But in the last 12 years, in the previous 10 years before that, we extended the railway line from downtown to Middleton and Cork. We built the Lewis. We did a partial reopening of the Navan line and the Western Rail Corridor and so on. Since then, the extension of the Lewis is probably the only significant job done. So we need just on these things to stop talking, take action, but particularly take big action on the big things. And make sure the ordinary people are shielded from it. The ordinary person, who has a minor consequence in all of this, is shielded from it. Two final things I'd like to address: foreign policy and peace, and future coalition. Our Constitution clearly lays out a roadmap for an independent Ireland, a country that had a sad experience of colonisation, to be a beacon of peace and reconciliation in the modern world. Indeed, within our own island, we have clearly over many years set out the principle of undoing the damage of the Government of Ireland Act of 1920 by peaceful means. And we've all said that unity should be achieved, not through the end of a gun, but by negotiation and peaceful means. That's not to say we justify what happened. Now, when you look at the Constitution, there are two big concepts in there. The first two relating to foreign affairs and Irish relations with the world. And the first one says, Ireland affirms its devotion to the ideal of peace and friendly cooperation amongst nations, founded on international justice and morality. And Ireland affirms its adherence to the principle of the pacific settlement of international disputes by international arbitration or judicial determination. I believe that we in the European Union and in the UN should every day articulate these values. And that we should articulate our view that the resolution of international disputes by militarism, armed stockpiling and war in the context of the modern world could have untold horrific consequences. People will tell you there's no other choice. But I'm going to give you three major examples in the modern world. One is the Good Friday Agreement, which we're celebrating this year. The second one is Gandhi's role in achieving Indian independence. He had no army. And the third one, and nearer to our own time than Gandhi, was the peaceful destruction of the European Union with virtually no violence and certainly with no major war. Now the militarists in the EU and NATO, with the backing of the enormous arms industry and their ex-colonial interests, will ridicule those who oppose them. But this is a small price to pay, for this country to pay, for trying to steer the world away from a course of self-destruction. And very briefly, they give F-16 bombers. Do you think Putin's going to sit in the Kremlin and say, well, that's fine, you can overrun us? He'll step it up. My worry is someday will decide, but I'm losing, and there's only way winning. I have the big button. And when it's all over, when people say, it doesn't matter that millions are dead, that we've destroyed so much of our world, we were right. No doubt there are people here who are anxious to find out what my view on proposed coalition involvement by Fianna Fáil is. Now, I think it's well known that I and John opposed the formation of this government, because I didn't believe that this government would reflect my views. Now, the majority of Fianna Fáil, by about 75-25, I think we got 26%, did not share my view at the time, and I accepted that. But my belief is, going forward, that what we have to do is review all of our policies and prepare to put them to the people and seek as much support for our policies as possible. And these should be new, vibrant and Fianna Fáil policies, not government policies. It is my view, and I concede on this, that at the moment the opinion polls give a true reflection of Fianna Fáil's electoral strength. But we've seen so many cases in the past, for example, Sinn Féin's incredibly weak situation in mid-2019 versus their 2020 general election performance, that proves that things can change very radically with new policies, with a new way forward in a very short time. Can any of you remember Gilmore for Taoiseach, because they were running ahead, Labour or Fine Gael in the opinion poll? 6 months out. And it all went up in a bubble of smoke. So my view would be that the policy we should adopt is to fight the next election on our own policies, come forward with radical solutions to the problems facing us, and that if after the next election we are the largest party, then with that mandate we should seek partners to implement our policies. Particularly if we think they reflect the type of republicanism that I have outlined today. If we're not the largest policy, I think we've been rejected, not for the first time by the electorate. And there's always one thing that's wise to do in that situation: accept it and move on. Go to Míle maith Bíofa.
By my calculation, that was only 32 minutes. And now, can I thank you very much for a very interesting, very varied array of subjects. And now, here for Mick O'Reilly.
The first thing I want to say is I met Desmond Greaves, who we're all coming here to honour, but 3 times in my life. The last time I seen him was at a public meeting in our own hall, in the Amalgamated Hall. And it was in the early 1980s. And there was a war going on in this country. And he was having a discussion over that situation with a number of Republicans and Socialists who were at the meeting. And Desmond was making the point that about 70% or maybe 60% of our laws were made in Europe. And he was posing the question to those who were involved in the armed struggle or supporting it: was it worthwhile to do that to make 30% of our laws? That's a very interesting question, because what he was talking about was sovereignty. And I believe that the concept of sovereignty is an indivisible thing. You cannot share it. You either have it or you don't. You can't share it with the Germans and the French and all the rest of it and still have it. And I think it's a very important concept to keep in our mind. Now, the reason why I think that's very important is this. The core reason, it's not to do with the social and economic policies that we can pursue and argue about. It is this: if I have a vote as a citizen in a republic, that vote, if sovereignty is interfered with, is devalued. That vote is devalued. And it's important to keep that in your head all the time, because that's what has happened in this situation. Thomas Fazzi on Friday night here at the school made a tremendously interesting case for the role of the national state again in our institutions and for the role of politics, real politics. And he said that if you don't have your own currency, you can't really make serious policies that confront those who control the currency. And I think he was wrong. Because, not wrong in all situations, I think he's generally correct. But there are situations in this country where we, when we had the pound sterling, exercised policies diametrically and absolutely opposed to Britain. And the biggest example of that is our role in the Second World War. It's interesting that in the debate over giving us back the treaty ports, Neville Chamberlain took the view that it didn't matter. Now, just imagine that. This is 1937. Fascism is walking across Spain. Fascism is in Italy. Fascism is in Nazi Germany. Fascism is all over Europe. There's a lot of fascism in Britain, and a fair amount of it here. And he took a view that that didn't matter, because the British ruling class had a simple view. If there was going to be a Second World War, it would be between the Soviet Union and Germany, and they would pick up the now it didn't work out like that, and the treaty ports did matter, as it so happened. But we had them, and the British left here in 1938. The 1937 Constitution is often criticised as Catholic and backward looking and inward looking and all of that stuff. Do people, any constitution or any document has to be relevant in its time. The Europe that was put forward, where we put forward the idea of the sovereignty of the Irish people making the decisions that mattered in this country, was when Europe was awash with fascism. And I think the people who've done that were brave, intelligent, forward-looking, and indeed Republican. And we have to look at how we can renew that situation in the contemporary situation that we're in now. And I think when you look at the global situation, and Eamon spoke about that, the global situation that we're in now, and also the debate running concurrently about the question of Irish unity, I think everybody at this school would support the idea of Irish unity. And we all have to work out what we're going to do in relation to how we bring this debate forward. In the 1980s, I was involved in a trade union campaign on the whole question of partition. And our view of it then was we set up a committee across the trade unions. And I was at that time a member of the Amalgamated Transport, which has a large unionist membership in the north of Ireland. And we took a view that it was trade unionists for a united and this is important, a united and independent Ireland. Because I think you have to offer people the prize of independence. Now let me say this, I think this is also important. We voluntarily decided to join the European Union. Now that's not the same as the union we were in with Britain, because the Irish people have decided to join the European Union. I don't agree with that decision. I didn't agree with it when it happened, and I don't agree with it now. And the reason I don't agree with it is simply this, because I don't say I succeed, but I have always tried to follow the teachings of James Connolly. And James Connolly was born in Scotland, but he was born into an Ireland that was overshadowed by the famine. And his view was developed, and this is, I think, important, that the national question and the independence of Ireland is at bottom a social question. Why do we want independence? Why do we have all these arguments with our comrades in Britain? Why do we want this? Because we believe that a sovereign government elected by us would put our interests first. And if we had had a sovereign government during the period of the famine, we would have not suffered the way that we did as a people. That lesson, I think, is embedded in every person in Ireland, even if they don't consciously go around talking about it. They know it in their bones, because it's what the struggle for independence was about. The struggle for independence is not about symbols or flags. The struggle for independence is about controlling the content of the way we live, about redistributing wealth, and about doing all the things that we want to do. So Frank Aiken, when we joined the United Nations first, we were, by the way, we were blocked from joining the United Nations when it was set up by a famous Marxist called Joseph Stalin, who didn't like our role in the Second World War, and he blocked us from joining. We didn't join the United Nations until the mid-50s. And the first representative there was Liam Cosgrave, who said that the role of Ireland in the United Nations was to promote Christian values and support America in its attacks in anything it wanted to do against the Soviet Union. That's what he said the thing was. Now contrast that. Just contrast that, because the coalition government didn't stay there long. And Frank Aiken was elected. Frank Aiken had been a soldier in the Republican Army. Frank Aiken had fought the British, and Frank Aiken went out of his way to make sure that he spoke in favour of all the colonial struggles. And he stood up, he didn't take the American side. He took the side of what he thought Irish Republicans should do. And there's astonishing lessons for him in that. Incidentally, his top civil servant was a man you'll all remember, maybe not for being Frank Aiken's civil servant, but it was Conor Cruise O'Brien. And he asked Conor Cruise O'Brien what he thought about voting to allow China into the United Nations. The Chinese were barred from the United Nations by the Americans. And the way it worked out was this: the Americans didn't even want a vote on the issue. And the British, by the way, took a different view. The British took a view that they're so big they should be let in. That's just the reality of the way Britain looks at things. But America was hostile to it. And John Foster Dulles went to Cardinal Spellman, and he asked him to contact De Valera to get Aiken to change his position. Right? And they refused to do it. They refused to do it, and they voted for the admission of China into the United Nations. Now, and you look at the nuclear proliferation treaties, you look at all the peace initiatives, you look at everything that was done, and you can only come to one conclusion. And I wrote a thesis on this when I gave up looking after differentials and wage rates. And I have to say, I studied Irish neutrality. And I started it on the basis of slightly uncomfortable. And the reason I was slightly uncomfortable is this. I believe that the Second World War, you can't say this about many wars, but I believe the Second World War was a war against barbarism of the worst kind. I also believe when the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union, the character of that war changed from an imperialist war to a class war, because they attacked the first worker state on this earth. And therefore, approaching this question of Irish neutrality, you would think I wouldn't end up as a cheerleader for Irish neutrality. But when I study the facts and I study the situation, I have changed my position entirely. And I would say Frank Aiken would be a hero of mine, actually, because I think what he done in that process is an example to everybody who believes in neutrality. And certainly the people who are in power now do not believe in Irish neutrality. They couldn't and behave the way they're going on. Now, in relation to where we go with this, I've said that sovereignty is an important thing and we have to try and get it back. Fine Gael have a policy, actually. They have a policy of joining NATO. They pursue it by denying that they have that policy. But they hollow out everything about neutrality all day and every day. And they have some allies in Fianna Fáil, not even. But there are some people in Fianna Fáil who share that view. Sinn Fein, I think, have the opposite view. I think Sinn Fein have a great chance to, if they get into power, and I agree with Micheál, I don't think they should be complacent about it. I don't think it's automatic. I think they have to win it. I think they have to fight for it. But I would caution on one thing. I'm not sure where Sinn Féin now stands sometimes on the question of sovereignty, Irish independence. And I get the fact that when you're in competitive politics, you have to be realistic. And you have to pitch your ideas to some degree about where people are at. And the European Union, for one reason or another, probably a lot of it is because of propaganda, but it's pretty popular with the Irish people. I don't think in the warning, if we asked them to leave, they'd want to leave. But nevertheless, we should still say it's our goal to one day have an independent Irish state. Now that doesn't mean that we put up borders around us and don't trade with anybody and don't do anything we've done. There are a number of countries which have a relationship with the European Union, and I believe it would save our neutrality more than anything else. Now, there's more to it. There's more to it than that, because there is, as we speak now, a war in Europe for the first time since the end of the Second World War. By the way, every day of its existence since the end of the Second World War, America has been dropping bombs on somebody somewhere. Usually Muslims or people in Latin America, etc., etc., etc. And we all remember the crisis in relation to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Americans have a Monroe Doctrine, which basically says that if somebody gets too near to us and it threatens our state, we get them to leave. They didn't ask the Cubans, by the way. The Russians controlled those weapons. The Cubans didn't. I'm kind of glad the Cubans didn't, because if the Cubans had it, they would never have done what the Americans asked them. The Cubans are a very strong, independent-minded people. The Russians had gone through a horrific thing, and Nikita Khrushchev used to say that if there is ever a nuclear war, he used to say, it is the only war in history where the living will envy the dead. That's the reality. But this language has all been forgotten in this war that we have going on. Now, we are a small country beside a very big country. And I get the Ukrainians and their argument with the Russians. I don't think Putin should have done what he done. I think it was wrong. But I don't think the answer is we are going to cleanse the Ukraine of the Russians, or more and more bombs are the answer. More and more weapons are the answer. There's a huge crisis in Europe, in Germany in particular, but all over Europe, in costs of energy, in the cost of food, in the cost of all these things. And there's no discussion on a peace process. Why can't the Irish government raise the question of how we get peace? The first thing we should say is we would like people to stop killing one another for a start, and then talk about what can be done. Because the day of American absolute dominance is over. The BRICS countries have lived. The People's Republic of China is there. It's going to have a huge, huge influence. And it's going to change the global politics entirely and completely. And I think we should be realistic about how we engage in that world, and not simply try to play up to our American and European colonial powers. That's not the way to take this country forward. It doesn't mean we have to, disagree with everything they say, but it means we have to be independent and look to our own interest in the long term. That, I think, is the view of where sovereignty should go. The second, the last thing I want to say is this. If we have a government that's elected, that's let's say has a left of centre social democratic programme about a proper role for our nationalised industries, our semi-state bodies, that we're going to look at the whole question of co-ops, the redistribution of wealth, more equality, all of these things. This is the agenda of the left, and it's the agenda of, should be the agenda of all Republicans in this country. But if we're going to do that, we have to have the elbow room to do it. And the fiscal clamp on finance placed on us by the European Union will make it very difficult for any left of centre government to redistribute wealth, to create greater equality, or to do anything that we want to do. By the way, these things can change in the blink of an eye. Remember when we had the pandemic? All the fiscal rules of Europe were just thrown out. And the leadership in Europe and in the Commission said, do whatever you have to do. In other words, pay people even if they're not working. And that was a great victory for socialism. I mean, I wouldn't have even asked for that. but that's what happened. That's the world we were in. Now we'll have to pay for that because there's no free lunch. But what I'm saying is, when a crisis is deep enough, right, policies can change, and change quickly and fast. And we should remember the most important thing, if we have a change of government, as I believe we will, is that they have, the most important thing they can do is have courage. Courage to involve people in the decisions that they make and make sure people stand behind it. When Roosevelt was elected in America, he called a meeting of American communists, socialists, radical Democrats, trade unionists, black people, and he assembled them, a huge meeting, and he said to them, now, make me implement the program. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw it open to the floor now. There's just one question I'd like to ask Eamon O'Keefe. You talked about who Fianna Fáil should partner with in the next election, and obviously it would depend on the results, but you didn't specifically rule Sinn Fein in or out, or you do mention them in that context. What would your attitude be to a coalition with Sinn Fein, either as a minor or a major partner?
I don't believe we should go into a coalition as a minor party.
Yeah, oh, okay.
Right. That's a smaller party.
Right.
I'm clear on that, because I think one of the extraordinary upturns of democracy in the last 10 years is that Fine Gael went from 76 to 50 to 35 seats and still wind up in government. I think the public don't like that concept. I'll be refusing to go, and they're giving you the P45 as they used to be. As far as I'm concerned, and I sit in committees in the Dáil, Sinn Féin is just like any other political party. So if you're harking back, have I got some hang up about the past? I don't. So as far as I'm concerned, But I'd look at it, what are Sinn Féin's policies? And would they be a better match for us than the other alternatives if we were going that route? But the issues that are always thrown up about the past, I spend my life in and out, talking to distance and so on, persuading them, as I did in the 94-96 period, to get involved in politics. I think is a total, for me it would be a personal total rejection of everything I told them, by saying if you get involved, and if you agree that the way forward is peace, but then the past is the past and let the historians judge the past. I hope that's absolutely unequivocal.